The Russian army in the region has been devastated by the recent raids conducted by the Ukrainian armed forces. The Russian army has abandoned many weapons and ammunition, and territories occupied by the Russian army have been subjected to persecution by Russian soldiers. According to Russian President Vladimir Putin, this has disgraced the ingenious plan he had devised for the situation. The fact that most troops in the Russian army carry out their duties following their whims continues to deal far more severe blows to the military. Putin, who is living in his fantasy world, is the one who must pay the price for this act of treason. According to recent allegations, Russian service members are said to have actively supplied military equipment to the Ukrainian armed forces in exchange for monetary compensation. The amount of merchandise sold is laughable, and it seems that these troops are making the transaction to get out of Ukraine. Russian troops are asking for an incredible $50,000 for their favorite Russian tanks. However, they sell the armored vehicle Tiger, which is one of the favorites of the Russian army, for just $5,000. Even before they were called to active duty, Russian service members could bring in more money in a single day than the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation guaranteed. The only thing between them and receiving more money than Putin promised is the simple act of surrendering their equipment and weapons. Russian troops are gradually beginning to sell equipment to the armed forces of Ukraine as part of a specific program. This is being done following a particular scheme. The outcome of such a transaction was the payment of $5,000 for the Tiger armored automobile, which had been sold by one of the troops serving in the Russian army in return for the right or complete non-mighty. Vitaly Kim is the one who filmed the video that was released on the subject. In the video, he demonstrates the armored vehicles that were acquired, but their condition is not perfect. In particular, there is a cover in the statement produced by a regional supervisor of Ukraine. This is in place of the typical cover generated by the filter. It was said that the process of selling is a rather straightforward algorithm. The Russian service members who abandon their vehicles or weapons near the front line will be required to provide Ukraine with the coordinates of their vehicles or accounts, after which the information will be validated. The transfer of the funds will take place after the information has been validated. According to what has been heard, this transaction would be conducted in full secrecy, and even the Russian troops will reportedly be paid for using Bitcoin. The Russian troops have lost trust in their leadership, and in response to this offer, they have said that they aim to leave Ukraine to make money. The costs seem to be extremely appealing as well. The Russian troops are willing to trade a tank for $50,000, a BMP-BMD for $25,000, and anti-aircraft cannons for $15,000. $10,000 for self-propelled cannons and other types of artillery, and $5,000 for armored vehicles. It is also important to note that the price of the tank is comparable to around 1,000 daily payments, which the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation promised the Russians who were going to take part in the battles. The employment of this military weaponry by the Ukrainian armed forces, offered for outrageous costs that would infuriate Putin, would tilt the scales in Kiev's favor during the conflict. Recent events may have brought to your attention that Russian police have been caught selling their weapons on the illicit market. Putin's defiance in the face of the crisis did not result in significant change. An authority on military matters has said unequivocally that Vladimir Putin's highest-ranking commanders defied him by trafficking essential equipment like tanks, pants, and tires on the black market. As a result of the fact that Russian forces are sometimes sent into battle without proper equipment, high-ranking officials frequently sell some of this weaponry on the underground market. It is not the first time that the fact that commanders and troops in the Russian army retain their weapons has been kept a secret in the Russian army. In other words, this is not a new practice. This practice has evolved into a custom at this point. Historically, a consistent flow of high-ranking military officers has been accused of bribery. This includes a Russian general who was relieved of his command for selling weapons when he was stationed in Kosovo. There have also been rumors circulating those Russian forces stationed in Chechnya had sold weaponry to the Chechen military. They were combating corruption inside the military, which even caused the previous Minister of Defense, Sergei Ivanov, to say in 2002 that the most important duty of the Ministry of Defense was to put an end to the plague of theft among the forces. In the early stages of the conflict in Ukraine, the Russian military struggled with logistical issues that caused vehicles to get bogged down in the mud and even drown. The video and still images also demonstrated that they could not move because of the punctured tires. However, unverified open-source information revealed that Russian authorities were purchasing inexpensive tires and pocketing surplus monies. Others claimed that people working in maintenance stole the budget for tire maintenance. However, these losses turned out to be a gift for the Ukrainian armed forces because, since the beginning of the world, Russian tanks and military equipment that had broken down or become inoperable were repaired and started to be used by the Ukrainian armed forces. This resulted in considerably more serious effects in the days that followed because the Russian army fled the city after the siege of Kiev, leaving a large portion of their weaponry behind for the Ukrainian troops. This occurred considerably during the Kharkiv operation that the Ukrainian military forces have been carrying out over the last several days. Nevertheless, abandoning equipment and fleeing the scene is a separate issue. Something entirely different happens when Russian troops sell their country's tanks and other military hardware to the Ukrainian military. This circumstance makes it quite evident that the Russian armed forces stationed in Ukraine, from the highest-ranked officials to the lowest-ranking soldiers, are trying to find a way out of the conflict. It has been said that military officers and police officers sell field clothes, maintenance budgets, and even meals on the black market. In this particular scenario, the Russian forces must be sent to the conflict while carrying the essential but lacking equipment. If you have an evil army and you wish to deploy a unit, even if it could seem on paper as though the unit is at full strength and ready to fight a battle, this is not the case in reality. This leads to confusion among the Russian leadership regarding the nature of their troops and the locations in which they can deploy them. The Russian army is responsible for its effects throughout the war effort, with each lost growth leading to more difficult challenges. The sellers might be of any rank, but the commander and hireling are most likely to be the ones doing the dealing. The study released by a significant analytics site underlines that corruption is concentrated by rank since senior officers have more access and control over equipment and finances in intelligence reports. This highlights the fact that corruption is concentrated by rank. There is also an issue with corruption in the system, with items going missing from the police with the lowest status up to the officers with the greatest position. Their capacity to combat is hindered by corruption. They have a weak deployment strategy, and as a result, they are not at war level. The amount of work that was put in is obvious. The fact that freshly deployed Russian troops are all of a sudden placed on the front line is one factor that, in particular, renders those troops incapable of engaging in battle. Many young Russians claim they do not want to fight but have suffered the loss of many of their comrades and returned to their homeland as veterans. On the other hand, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a partial mobilization with no defined boundaries, which caused Russia to become hell and caused many of the country's inhabitants to start receiving rewards in different sections of the Russian Federation. Young people in Russia are breaking their arms and legs rather than going to war because they don't want to die pursuing the absurd ideals of a leader they don't believe in. This is why the Russian youth who broke their arms and legs are now risking their limbs to be injured rather than going to war. When this conflict started, Putin thought he could capture Kiev in only 3 days. On the other hand, from that day till now, the military forces of Ukraine have become much more powerful. It is important not to undervalue Russia's unintended help for the Ukrainian army, which comes in addition to the backing from the West.